All right, so I am Avery Cook. I'm the upland game project leader for the Utah Division of Wildlife. So basically just an upland game biologist for the state here. Thanks for joining us for checker partridge photo monitoring training. So I'll start with a little background on what this project is and why we're doing it, and kind of an overview of the process, and then I'll go through the whole process in a little bit more detail. So previous to about 3 years ago, the Division of Wildlife flew 2 chukar helicopter surveys a year in the Cedar Mountains and the south end of the Grouse Creek Mountains around Chukar Knolls area to survey and get an annual index of chukar populations. But that helicopter flight index was good, and it got us a year-to-year change, but it was limited in geographic scope, so just kind of that northwest portion of Utah, and it also didn't give us annual production, so you can really only tell if it's a chukar or not from the air. It's pretty hard to discern if it's a chick versus an adult. About 3 years ago, we transitioned over to a camera survey method where we put game cameras on water sources throughout the state. Right now we've got about 45 cameras out, and with that we can get both the year-to-year change in attendance at the water sources, but one of the main advantages is we can get chick adult ratios, so get an idea of that year's production, and get both a long-term population index on that, how the populations are changing, and also a shorter-term outlook that gives a reasonable prediction of what the coming chukar season is going to be like in the state. So what I'm doing here is asking you, all as volunteers, to help with this project in reviewing those photos. So looking through the photos, seeing if there's chukars in the photos first off, and then counting the number of chicks and adults throughout the day. So with the structure of the monitoring we have each day broken up into half-hour blocks, and then within each of those half-hour blocks, looking for the photo with the maximum number of adult chukars and the photo with the maximum number of chukar partridge, and that can be the same photo or it can be different photos within each half hour during the day. So with that, I'll kind of get to some of the details in the project of how the project will work. So I'll be sending you a link to a Google Drive folder, and then in that Google Drive folder, there will be a compressed zip folder that has both the photos in it, as well as some empty files to put pictures of chukars in, and then also some other animals of interest. The zip folder also has a spreadsheet to record the data in, so number of chicks and adults for each one of those half-hour blocks throughout the day, and then a copy of some written instructions that go through all of what I'll be presenting tonight so that you can review that. I'll also put a recording of this training session up on YouTube that if you need to look back on it, it'll be available. So after you receive that link to that Google folder, you'll need to download that zipped folder onto your computer, onto your hard drive. If you try and do the sorting on the cloud in the Google Drive folder, it is extremely slow and does not work well. It can be quite frustrating. So make sure you do download that to your local hard drive. Once you've got it there, if you're using a PC, you can just right-click on that zip folder and click Extract All, or the top ribbon menus in File Explorer. There's a compressed folder tools that'll pop up when you highlight a zipped folder, and you can just click Extract All on there. So once you've got that folder unzipped, it'll look like this. So there's going to be kind of the unsorted and then a guzzler name folder. So that'll have just all of the photos. And then we've just got a chukar folder, which any picture of a chukar, put it in there. And then a mammal folder, another bird folder, a pinyon jay folder, and a reptile and amphibian folder. Then a miscellaneous. So miscellaneous would be, I don't know, somebody driving by on their four-wheeler, or another person looking at the guzzler, or just anything that's not an empty photo that doesn't fit in any of those categories. There's also the data sheet on there where you'll be entering the data, and then a copy of the PowerPoint that we're going through right now, and the written protocol. So within that unsorted folder, each photo is going to be named in this format. So the site name, so that'll be the guzzler code. It'll be 3 letters and 3 numbers to identify the camera and the guzzler. And then just a year, month, day, hour, minute, and second to identify that individual photo. The cameras are set up to take 3 photos when they're triggered. So there'll be 3 photos 10 seconds apart, and then at least a minute between those sets of 3 photos. You can use whatever photo viewer your computer has, what you like. The window default photo viewer works just fine. One bug that I have seen using that is after a couple thousand photos, sometimes these photo sets can have a lot of false triggers and have just a lot of empty photos, and they add up. But if you're getting to kind of over the 1,000 photo mark, it starts skipping photos sometimes. So basically, if just each day of camera time, so each day during the survey, as you're looking through, if you just close and reopen that photo viewer, it seems to avoid that problem. If you are looking through a large number of photos, it's pretty easy to differentiate between kind of a blank frame and one with something in it. As your eyes look at that unchanging frame, as soon as even a small detail changes in it, that usually is pretty evident, even if you're clicking through these photos pretty quickly. When sorting them, I ask you to cut and paste or move them and not copy them. If you copy them, you end up getting just a even bulkier file that's even harder to upload. So make sure you're moving or cutting and pasting and not copying the photos as you move them from the unsorted to the Chukar folder or other folders. So if there's a Chukar in any part of the frame, put it in the Chukar folder. Otherwise, put it in the folder for whatever category fills more space in that frame of the photo. A little bit on identification of what we're looking at. So Chukar partridge is a desert adapted bird that lives on most of the desert ranges on the western portion of the state, and some areas in other parts of the state as well. So they're pretty distinctive. The adults have that kind of zebra stripe barring on their sides, and then they've got this belly band up around their neck to that eye stripe, and a red bill. So there's really no other kind of chicken-looking birds that will commonly be at these guzzlers. So these will be one of the most common birds that you'll see in the photos, and they're also pretty much the only gallinaceous game bird you'll see. So chicken-like game bird that'll be at these guzzlers. So you've got the adult with kind of that distinct barring on the side, blue-gray head, a little bit of a reddish wings and red feet. The chicks are basically a smaller, drabber version. As they grow, they start with a little patch of black right in the center of their neck there, above their chest, and as they grow older, that ends up connecting to the eye stripe on their head. And then as they get older too, they get more and more of that distinct barring instead of that more camouflaged plumage. Just to give you an idea of how their appearance changes as they grow. When they first hatch out, they look just like a little yellow chicken chick, except they're brown. By the time we put the cameras out, there are very few chicks that are that young. That's pretty unusual. Usually they're more in this kind of 8 to 12 week age class where you've got a pretty distinct neck patch and you've got a fairly distinct eye band, but they haven't kind of connected yet. But they will generally be with adults too that have that distinctive barring. And they'll also, again, it's one of the only kind of chicken-like birds you'll see out there, game birds. And then we'll just kind of go through a few examples of photos that look like what you might see. So here's just one example with two adult chukars leaving a guzzler. You can see that kind of contrasted to these birds here. You've got a couple adults in the lower center of the frame here, and then the rest of these are about 6-week-old chukars. And I'm not asking you to identify the birds to age in the photos, but just kind of going through the different ages a little bit to give you an idea of what you're looking for as far as chicks and adults in the photos. Here's another example of that same photo separated by a few seconds. So oftentimes they'll be standing in front of one another in the photo, and it can be hard to count. But often if you go through those 3 photos that shoot in a series, you'll be able to see a little movement and see behind them. But basically just make your best count of what you can see there, but you don't have to spend tons and tons of time trying to figure out exactly what's standing behind another one. Usually I'll just start by going and counting the heads. Like on this one, you can see like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then 2 adults. But if you go back, you can see like the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, again, 7, 8 chicks in that photo and 2 adults. Kind of just another example. These ones are probably about 7 weeks old. Standing on a guzzler here. They've got the eye stripe, and they've starting to get that belly patch, but hasn't connected, and they're still fairly drab. You can kind of see the zebra striping starting to come out on the sides. They're pretty indistinct. Here's another example with some older chicks. These ones are probably about 13 weeks old with some adults in here. So you got 1 adult, 2 adult, and a bunch of chicks in here. If you zoom in a little bit, you can again see they've got this eye stripe, but it's a little bit browner and drabber compared to the real dark black of the adults. And it's also not connecting through. As they get older and older, they get harder to tell. But this is about as old as chicks as you'll probably be seeing this year. While you're going through the photos, if you do have any questions, feel free to email me with the photo that you're looking at, and I can help you figure out what's in there. Or if you're just going through, you can also just note it on your data sheet that you weren't quite clear on that, and I can go look at it after you turn it in.
Put it in front of Bungie.
Here's another example where they can be a little hard to see, but they do kind of pop out as you go through the different frames of the photo. So in this one, there are some birds on the right, a little hard to see, but as you kind of change photos, it pops out that there's a change there, so you can see kind of the 1 adult, 2 adults in there. I have another example of a less clear photo, but you've got 2 adults in this one. You've got a fairly obvious one here at the bottom left, and then you've got another one with its head just poking in the frame. Oftentimes you'll be able to advance to the next photo to get a little bit better idea of it. But if you can identify it as a chukar, even if it's not fully in the frame, please do count it. If you can't tell what it is, you don't have to count it. And this doesn't have to be, should be as kind of as good as you can get it, but if it's not exact, it's not critical, because this is kind of an exercise of averages. So we're looking at how many birds come into the water over a couple of weeks, and then we kind of regionally lump that data to So. And then again, kind of for the data recording, we're looking at half-hour blocks throughout the day. So basically from midnight to 12:29, 12:30 to 12:59, 1 a.m., etc. throughout the day. Generally, there's not many photos in the middle of the night, at least of chukars. Sometimes we'll get different mammals coming through and various other things. But for each hour, half-hour time block, just count the maximum number of chicks in a photo and the maximum number of adults in a photo. And those can be same or different photos within each half hour. Put 0 on the data sheet if there's no photos for that time period, and also put 0 on the data sheet if there's no chukars in the photos for that time period. If you do see a group of chukars that crosses one of those edges of the time blocks, like you see them there at 8:25 and then 8:35, you would count them in both of those half-hour blocks, even if you think it's the same group. And we do that just because that's a way we can standardize the data, where it can be pretty difficult sometimes to tell with different groups coming into a camera, especially if there's a number of broods. They'll often come in right one after each other and kind of blend together. So always just the maximum number for each half-hour block throughout the day. Here's an example of the data sheet you'll see coming in those zip folders. So each row is just a day, and then columns are times. So again, midnight to 12:29, low dark 30 to low dark 59, 1 a.m. to 1:29, etc. So with each of those half-hour blocks, just the number of adults, number of juveniles for the maximum. Also, if you can make sure this photo info is filled out, it should come with the camera ID and photo year and already filled out. But if you could put your name in there, and then there's also a space for any notes, whether you've got a question on a particular photo, if you're not quite clear what's in there and you want me to take a look at it, or if there's just something interesting. If you do see any really cool photos, I would really appreciate it if you flag those, even if they're not chukar. If you see a neat photo, please put it in the notes. Aside from the focus on the chukars up here in this top portion of the data sheet, if you can just note yes or no if you've seen some of these other species down on the bottom, as far as some of our big game species, some of our rabbit and hare species, some predator species, also Indian jays, or anything else that you are able to identify of note. Would be great if you could include that in the additional species seen area here. Just another example, so this was kind of what it would look like as you're working through it. So usually in the night, you're not seeing much. There's probably not even any photos, so just put 0s for those times of day when there's no photos. And then as you start to see birds, if you put just the maximum number for that half-hour period for adults and juveniles. There are occasionally photo sets with no chukars for the entire time, so you could just fill it with 0s as you go through. And then kind of on the bottom, just an example of what you put in there. So there'd be a camera ID and a year that should be pre-populated in there, and if you could just put your name and any notes, and then just kind of click X for yes or no if you see these species, and then if you do, if you could just note the day of the month in that date field. And then that's just an example of what it might look like at the end of the period, or the end after you've gone through it, fill all that out. Feel free to, if you've got long rows of 0s, feel free to copy and paste those 0s down to save you a little time in going through that. So just a couple other species of note that I would like you to look for going through these photos. One is a opinion jay. So if basically larger songbird that's kind of a gray, blue, drab color. They've got relatively long black bills. There's not a lot of other birds that will be coming into the guzzlers that look like these. They're also not fairly common, so you probably won't be seeing a ton of them, and you will definitely not be seeing them in every photo set. But if you do see them, if you could note them on that bottom portion of the data sheet, be much appreciated. We've also got golden eagles, and there's some monitoring work going on with banded golden eagles. So if you do see a golden eagle, if you can take a close look and see if you can see a band on their legs, and if you do see a band on their legs, please note that in the data sheet with the individual photo number so we can go and pull that out. Just a few examples of what you could possibly see if you see an eagle. Most of them will not have bands, but hopefully we do see a few with them. At the end of the project and throughout, if you could keep track of your hours, we'll just be crediting exact hours that you work on the project. So just put the date each time you're working on the project, a start time and an end time, and the total hours in there. You can also include a half hour for the training today. When you have completed a photo set, if you keep all of the files in that parent folder and then rezip that parent folder, top level folder back up, which would be the one that would be labeled with the guzzler name. And once you zip it, recompress it, if you upload it to that original Google Drive folder that I'll send you the link for. If you're having difficulty uploading it, because they can be big, if you could just send me an email with the spreadsheet in there, I can get the data incorporated quickly into kind of our fall forecast, and then we can just mail you a thumb drive to send that bigger folder back over if you're having trouble uploading it. So if you've got any questions, feel free to get a hold of me. And then at either my email or my phone there. And now I'm going to stop recording here and have some opportunity for any questions.